I was looking at the S&P before. The Dow's fallen 800 points. Or that's just in one day. 1,300 over the past 5 days. That's a lot. It could go farther. It could go farther. The Dow is only industrials. Yeah, but yeah, doesn't that make sense? Because this is the stuff would be most affected by the initial, like the steel tariffs and the this would be the most immediately affected group, you know? Index funds are currently outpacing asset management gains for the last that last a few years. So if the index has crashed, the game's actually over. I don't know if I'm finance pilled enough to know what that means exactly. What does that mean? Don't worry about it, kitten. Yay. That's what you guys need to do for me, okay? Look at the 6-month graph for context. It fell off a cliff. Yeah, this is a very, very, very sudden drop. Post-election boom, goes back down, goes back up in anticipation of the inauguration, holds steady, kerplunk. Plus or minus 3% is a meh burger? I don't necessarily think that's true. Tesla's dropping again, which is funny. Right after getting a government contract, too. Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin are down significantly. Well, the real wealth in those companies is their actual, like, contracts, you know? Not their speculative value. Elon flat out said their goal is to lower bond yields, which is going to be very bad if that's the stated intent. Going to cause a bond crash, and then we'll really see markets tremble. So what you're saying is buy gold? Also, what is this? Love all the red lines on the top right there. It sounds too radical to even warrant a second thought. That Trump could force some of the U.S.'s foreign creditors to swap their treasuries into ultra long-term bonds to ease the country's debt burden. Oh, no. What if I would gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today? 200-year vampire bonds? Well, okay, I have an idea, right? What if we simply sold the soul of the nation to Beelzebub? And after 1,000 years of prosperity, an eternity of darkness. I don't even think people would go for this. We did that when Reagan was president. Yeah, but for one, that was back when America was... I think people were a bit more optimistic about the future, and we had much less debt back then. That was a different world. The idea of dramatically restructuring America's debt load as part of the Trump team agenda to revamp global trade via tariffs, weaken the dollar, and ultimately reduce borrowing costs, all with the goal of putting U.S. industry in even more footing with the rest of the world, said Bianca over 3-decade market. Well, these are just rumors. The Mar-a-Lago Accord. Many of the ideas behind the agenda come from a November 2024 paper by Stefan Mira, Trump's nominee to lead the White House Council of Economic Advisors. In it, the former Treasury official laid out a roadmap for reforming the global trading system and weeding out economic imbalances driven by persistent dollar over-evaluation. It also states that the desire to reform the global trading system and put American industry on fairer ground vis-a-vis the rest of the world has been a consistent theme for President for decades. Oh, no. There's no way they actually do this, right? Like, if they actually did that, if they actually went in this direction, what holding would the wealthy people even transfer their... like... What would they, like, are we talking like Chinese yuan? What are they moving over to? You know? Like what would they do to Bitcoin? Could be Bitcoin. Nah, it wouldn't be Bitcoin. Maybe it would be. Just beans. Just lots and lots of beans. It's time to take the risk of the Trump administration orchestrating a weaker dollar more seriously. The Trump administration has a proclivity for bold, high-stakes maneuver. Oh, man. Well, yuan is too reliant on USD Treasury. Yeah, I don't even know how you would... For what it's worth, there are problems with the strength of the US dollar, even to Americans. It's one of the reasons why labor is so expensive here. Like there is the trade imbalance caused by the US dollar being the global reserve currency, leading to the high valuation of the USD. It's very complicated. It's much more complicated than I can wrap my head around. But there are negatives to it. It's just that fixing that would break a lot of things, you know? It would be quite bad. If like I don't know. I guess we need to give support to Mark Carney's plan to ensure there is no single world reserve currency to restore economic balance. Yeah, maybe so. I mean, if you think about it, not having any single global reserve currency might do a lot to... I'd have to think about it. I'm sorry, we're entering into a realm where I haven't even thought enough about it. I would need to like read papers or read a book or something, or I don't know. I would need to think about it. Why have the other countries relied on the US for its currency in the first place? Well, us our having the global reserve currency is beneficial to a lot of people, you know? It means that it's a safe investment, you know, treasuries, bonds, like the US government is the US dollar is resistant to inflation. Everyone is invested in the strength of the US dollar because it's held by so many people. The size of our economy means like it's a big thing, you know? It's not colonialism. Chat, stop being. Yeah, a little bit of colonial. The U.S. petrodollar definitely is. You know, we've definitely used it to flex our might quite a bit. But there are some downsides to it. But yeah, well, yeah. But then the Brits like lost their empire, Masagui. After World War II, we were the top dog. Top dog. Top dog. Okay, somebody in chat who knows more than me. What would devaluing the U.S. dollar to like a point of parity look like? Like what would its relative devaluation look like? Are we talking like a 20%, 30%? Or how many future dollars would you need to make $1 today? Like, would it be like dropping a dollar to 150? I know it wouldn't happen immediately, but that's not how economics works. I understand it's complicated. What I mean is that, like, if it wasn't for the boost that the weight gets by being the global reserve currency, I wonder, like, what eventually there would be, like, a relative settling point, you know? Like, relative to, say, the euro, if you want, or the yuan, or whatever else. I don't know. No one can answer that, I guess. That's too complicated. It's too complicated, yeah. It would destroy a lot of countries. It would be quite bad for many countries that hold U.S. debt. I mean, it'd be bad for Americans, too. Look at what happened in Argentina. Vosh, please just take an Econ 101 course. Can you take a Don't Be Condescending course? For me, it came free with having good parentage. You might have to, like, shell out for therapy, though. Sorry. That's not really how it works. It would be 1-to-1 because currency depreciation is... No, I know that! You know what I mean! Don't be a pedant. You know I'm gesturing, okay? Also, yeah, the idea that 101 econ would cover the, like, removal of the US dollar as the global reserve currency and the devaluation to reach trade parity. Oh, yeah, that's just 101 stuff. Oh, yeah, I bet. You. Bosch, try not to be condescending challenge. I'm not taking that challenge. I would lose that challenge immediately. I'm not taking that challenge. That sounds difficult and scary. I'm not doing that. US dollar being strong is why China is able to export so much and still have its manufacturing industry. Yeah, I don't know. The reason they would do this is because it would make it easier to pay back America's debt, because all of a sudden the value of the debt held would be lower. Huh, Tesla's down 5%. It actually wouldn't, though, because the economy would collapse. Well, you know. Isn't our debt a good thing, though? Well, it's complicated, okay? It's complicated. It's complicated. The honest truth is that there probably shouldn't be any global reserve currency. No, there should be a global reserve currency. It just probably shouldn't be tied to any nation's economy. There should be like an underlying standard that's agreed upon by some fiddly group of bureaucrats with tiny spectacles that do their work under those like green bankers lights or whatever. Like you have like a standard that gets evaluated and every nation has like representatives that go over or whatever like, but you wouldn't want it to be tied. Bitcoin, exactly, Bitcoin. You wouldn't want it to be tied to any one nation's economy because that leads to a bunch of like imbalances with regards to like exports and imports and labor costs in the country and just da-da-da-da-da. Impossible. A reserve currency needs state power behind it. Well, the idea is that the state power would be the consensus of all the nations that agree to use it, which ideally would be everyone. But I recognize that this is a fantasy in the modern world. I'm talking about like an abstract. That's exactly what the gold standard was. Well, no, because the gold standard, you had the gold, like nations had the gold to weigh the currency by. I'm not talking about a gold standard or something that's like tied to anything material. I'm talking about like a fiat standard that is agreed upon bureaucratically. The tulip bulb standard? Exactly. The Earth dollar. That would need the UN to be useful? Oh, well, you know, whatever. This is a little bit like way above my pay grade. Isn't the EU a version of this? The EU isn't a state, but a trade union of states using a universal currency? Yeah, right now the euro is probably the closest thing we have to what I'm talking about, though obviously the euro isn't an international standard, but yeah, it's the closest we've got, I guess. You know, it's not perfect, but the euro is a strong currency. This is literally what Bitcoin was initially meant to be. No, Bitcoin is a speculative vehicle based on the blockchain that's meant to be free from the traditional standards of government regulation. I'm talking about an extremely government regulated thing. I'm talking about every government on earth coming together to regulate a highly centralized currency. Like, it's the opposite of crypto, if anything, you know? Yeah, but the creator was an idealist. Yeah, well, people say lots of stuff. Euros are pretty too. That's true. Pretty good short video on Trump wanting to devalue the dollar. You know what? F it, sure. And then we're done with this topic.
Since Trump's victory earlier this month, the dollar has surged as investors bet that his program of tariffs and tax cuts will force the dollar up. But while this might sound like good news, Trump and his vice president J.D. Vance actually spent the campaign calling for a weak dollar, which they hoped could rejuvenate America's manufacturing base. So in this video, we're going to look at why Trump...
There is some truth to that, by the way, but not necessarily... It's complicated.
...wants a weaker dollar, and how he could go about actually devaluing the world's reserve currency. So, let's start by taking a look at what Trump has actually said. The last time he talked about this explicitly seems to have been in late July, when, during an interview with Bloomberg, he said that the dollar's strength, specifically against the yen and the yuan, is, quote, a big currency problem. But this has actually been a long-standing issue for Trump. He constantly complained that the dollar was overvalued during his first term, and pushed the Federal Reserve to cut rates to bring its value down. This is something that J.D. Vance has talked about too. Last year, when Vance was questioning Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, he suggested the dollar was fundamentally overvalued. And in April, he told Politico, devaluing, of course, is a scary word, but what it really means is American exports become cheaper. Now, to be fair to Trump...
And that's it. And that's it. That's the only outcome. That's the only thing that would happen if you devalue our currency. By the way, to be clear, devaluing our currency literally just means increasing inflation. Like, there's more to it than that, but like when they say they want to devalue the dollar, they're literally saying they want inflation. Like, their literal like campaign platform is increasing inflation.
Trump, there is a relatively widespread consensus that the dollar is indeed overvalued. The IMF reckons that the dollar is overvalued by about 10%, and it's been consistently strengthening against other currencies, with the so-called broad dollar index increasing by 25% over the past 2 decades. This is despite the fact that the US usually runs pretty hefty trade deficits.
How do billionaires gain from this again? Oh, God. It's really complicated. Okay, so for one, billionaires don't necessarily hold all their wealth in USD, right? Like, they can shift where their money is and how it's held depending on like a variety of circumstances. The way they hold their money, where it's stored, what currency it's stored in, the mechanism of its storage, whether the way they've stored it is resistant to inflation or not, they have more control over their money than you do, right? For you, it's like you just have the money you get in your paycheck. And you know how a lot of export-heavy countries are very economically unequal, right? Like, there are countries where there's a bunch of resource extraction that they sell out to the West for pennies on the dollar relative to us. Like, you can go to like the Democratic Republic of the Congo or whatever, and for like $5 you can just like buy what, because our money is worth so much compared to their currency. You can just walk in, the value of their labor and resources like nothing, you know? You can go in, just yoink their shit. Well, those countries tend to be very unequal, and the reason for that is because that system of like export-heavy trade is beneficial to autocrats because it allows them to devalue the labor of their own country. And American oligarchs have had an issue over the past few decades of the average worker having... we're basically getting into like 1984 stuff, but I genuinely think that the long-term goal here is everyone's standard of living gets worse, but the wealthy the least so. Like, they would rather be warlords over a feudal state than wealthy oligarchs in a democratic state where the average citizen lives a comfortable life. It's about relative power differences, I think. From the perspective of an American oligarch, I genuinely think it's about stratifying those differences. Because while an American oligarch might have much more power than an African warlord has way more power over their constituents than any American oligarch does over theirs, you know? And if you're like America and your economy is very heavy on like speculation, service economy, and imports, you can't really build that dynamic, because if your whole economy is built on imports, what happens if you make the average citizen too poor to import stuff, to buy imported goods? Your economy collapses. So you have to rely on something else. You need like another basis of wealth. You know? This is just my estimate, okay? I acknowledge, again, it's one of those like, you should look into how the EU did this exact thing to Greece and Spain within the EU after 2008. Pretty comparable to what Trump's doing now. Yeah, I should look more into that. I agree.
i.e. it imports more than it exports, which should entail a weaker currency. So why is the dollar overvalued? Well, the main reason is its status as the world's reserve currency. In other words, the currency that central banks and financial institutions like to hold in reserve because it's considered safe. And this creates more demand for dollars internationally, artificially inflating its value. So why does Trump actually want to devalue it? After all, at first glance, having an overvalued currency sounds like an advantage. And it's something that America's adversaries, including Russia and China, regularly complain about. An overvalued currency means that you get to import more than you otherwise could. And the dollar's status as the world's reserve currencies is one of the reasons that the US can unilaterally impose such punishing financial sanctions. But while there are clearly some advantages, over the past few years, some commentators have started wondering whether this might actually be a bad thing. The main downside is that an overvalued currency makes your exports less competitive internationally, which is especially bad news for your manufacturing base, who struggle to export and are often undercut by cheaper imports. And this is the argument made by both Trump and Vance. In his Bloomberg interview, Trump claimed, "I've been talking to manufacturers. No one wants to buy our product because it's too expensive." And Vance described the dollar's reserve status as a massive tax on American producers. In fact, today there's a relatively widespread consensus that the dollar's reserve status has contributed to America's deindustrialization. And as politicians have become increasingly keen on rebuilding America's manufacturing base, they've started questioning the dollar's reserve status. American politicians also often...
I wish this video... Will this video investigate why they want to rebuild domestic manufacturing? It's not like they give a shit whether or not our cars come in from China or whatever, you know? It's like they still make money hand over fist. They don't give a fuck about rebuilding manufacturing.
Attribute China's economic success to its practice of deliberately devaluing its currency, which has kept exports competitive and protected its industrial base. At the same time, other countries have started pushing back against the dollar's reserve status as the US has ramped up its use of financial sanctions. But regardless, can Trump actually devalue the dollar? Well, before we get into how he might actually do it, it's worth noting that most of Trump's other economic policies would actually result in a stronger, not weaker dollar. His famous tariffs, for instance, would probably result in a stronger dollar for two reasons. Firstly, most people think that tariffs would result in higher inflation, which would prompt the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates. And higher interest rates usually mean a more valuable currency, because it makes it more attractive to save in that currency. This dynamic would be exacerbated by proposed tax cuts, which would also stoke inflation by increasing disposable income. Second, countries like China might respond to tariffs by further devaluing their currencies, which would effectively push up the value of the dollar, given its value is defined relative to other currencies.
This sounds way too Trump-glazy. I don't think this is Trump-glazy. I think it's just talking about...
This is actually why the dollar has appreciated since Trump's victory, as investors began to bet on high tariffs and therefore a stronger dollar. Trump has also made it clear that he wants to maintain the dollar's reserve status. That being said, I am content stealing and I feel bad about it. Threatening to impose 100% tariffs on countries that, quote, leave the dollar, and telling the Economic Club of New York that, quote, losing the world currency would be the equivalent of losing a war. So if the analysis we've outlined is correct, protecting or reinforcing the dollar's reserve currency status will probably mean a stronger, not weaker dollar. But even if he dropped these policies, or they didn't have the impact that most people expect, it's still...
Nah, it's a little glazy since it's ignoring service exports and FDI. I don't know. I don't... Your name is Step Bro, stop it. I'm not listening to you. God, this is an unflattering photo.
It wouldn't be easy for Trump to actively weaken the dollar. In theory, weakening your currency shouldn't be all that difficult. After all you need to do is print a load of it and use it to buy other currencies on the market. But the fundamental issue here is that the Federal Reserve, which as America's central bank is the only entity that can print dollars, is operationally independent. So the president just can't tell them what to do.
Sorry, wait, I just realized that I'm operating off of 2 hours of sleep and I haven't been absorbing this information. Cut the segment. Cut it. I'm being a hack. A hack and a fraud.